Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Lost Voice Radio. This is John Studi, along with my best friend, Jacob Nelson. And today we're here to bring you some of the lost voices of wisdom, which first spoke to Socrates roughly, how many years ago? 2,500 years ago. I say voices this time.
Dr. Mahfood will email us and yell at us.
He will, and he'll correct us. And I'll once again say that we're philosophers and theologians here, one in three, three in one, one in the many. It's all very confusing for us. Well,
really, it's all the same.
Yes, right? Because we are substantially monists. Anywho, Jake, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. Right now, I'm actually working a kind of a split shift today, so I'm not in my office because I have a meeting tonight with the Women's Council at church. So, they want to know more of like what I'm doing and how they can support what I'm doing. So, it's good. I'm not actually joining the Women's Council.
Well, I'm wondering, what is the Women's Council?
Great many reasons. It's a council of women who gather in a council format to do things that women do, like pray. Does that help?
Oh, that's good.
So I'm actually at home right now in my extremely messy garage because I'm in the middle of 3 different projects.
I know, same here. Speaking of projects,
you're in my garage too.
Yeah.
That's weird. I don't see you.
Find me under your table. Speaking of being under things, and it's creepy. So my 6-year-old daughter's been waking up at night, just afraid of her bed and afraid of her room and whatnot. And she just doesn't leave me and Molly alone, which kind of sucks because then we don't get any sleep. But she's figured out a solution. Would you like to know what her solution is?
Sure.
They're her and her sister sleep in a bunk bed. And so my 6-year-old's solution is actually to sleep under her sister's bed, and her sister's on the bottom. So she actually crawls under there and cozies on up with a just giant bear that she has, is bigger than she is, and she sleeps under her sister's bed at night. And for whatever reason, that has made it so that she's comfortable sleeping in her room. And so now I make the joke, of course, that she's the monster under her sister's bed, which is obviously hilarious. It is weird. Went in there yesterday to check on them, and I couldn't find my 6-year-old anywhere. And I was like, where is she? And she wasn't anywhere else in the house. And then I peeked under the bed, and she's sleeping under there. It was just strange having kids be creepy. Children are creepy. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go off on several rails, the tangents and whatnot here. So my son, when he was a bit younger, was this a year and a half ago now, I was trying to get him to memorize the Hail Mary prayer, and he did. But for some reason, he was obsessed with the line, the hour of our death, the hour of our death. And he would just walk around repeating, the hour of our death, the hour of our death. And I was thinking, what sort of hell-sent harbinger are you? Why does my son have such proclivity to predicting our doom? Because there were other times when he'd say stuff while we're driving, and he says, "Dad, the van tipped over, and it was on fire." I'm like, "No, it didn't. The van has never tipped over. It's on fire." "It will." "What are you talking about, Chad? The hour of our death. The hour of our death." I don't know why I do this. This can scare me all night. Is your child creepy yet?
Is what?
I said, is your child creepy yet?
Is he what?
Creepy.
Creepy. No. I don't think so. He's still sweet as can be.
Oh, he is pretty sweet. He's got a good disposition. He didn't really seem to want to talk to me when we were at the park the other day, though.
Well, he's not really talking yet, so there's that. He babbles.
But doesn't he say, like, Dad and Mama now?
Yeah. He likely was really confused because he saw matter that was animated, but there was no soul.
And of course, he's at just a little over a year old, he's more than capable of going to abstraction in every form.
Right.
If I don't have a soul and therefore no form, is it actually possible to cognize me? Did he really know what I am, or does he possess a power to know matter, qua matter?
But matter in and of itself doesn't actually exist.
All right, no, it doesn't. It always exists in some form. So if I don't have a soul,
right,
but I have matter.
Philosophically, matter doesn't have existence on its own. It's always in a form, like you said.
Yeah, it's instantiated by form, or it instantiates a form that gives it form, organizes it towards a common end.
Right.
But if I don't have form, do I have a common end? Maybe that's why I'm so scatterbrained. Please no one murder me in my sleep. We should get a laugh track, Jake.
You might be. We should. You might be scatterbrained, but you know what else, Duty? You're absolutely full of scat.
Like scat scat skidadoo skit cat ski, like from those old big bands where you'd.
No, that's ska.
What? It's not ska. Ska is like punk music with orchestral instruments.
Why do we do this?
I don't know. Who gave us this show?
I don't know.
Why do they pay us?
I had a back and forth email exchange with Dr. Mahfood about the merit of gaining a doctorate degree, because we were talking about that one day on the show. And I am absolutely shocked that Dr. Mahfood listens to our show.
Yeah.
And B, I'm even more shocked that he hasn't canceled our show after listening. But we had an email exchange about, and he made some good points. If you had like Dr. Zhivago, would that sound as good if it was Master Zhivago? I said, well, it's true. So my response to him was, let's just take somebody of an average title, say Mr. Miyagi.
Mm-hmm.
And you elevated him, knowing the talents of an average man like Mr. Miyagi, because he goes by Mr.
Sure.
You elevated him. What would sound more profound given the scope of his abilities and talents and what he does? Master Miyagi or Dr. Miyagi? Mm-hmm. And I contend it's Master Miyagi sounds better because he's mastered the disciplines of whatever he does. You would know.
Yeah, Shotokan karate, I think.
There you go. And I further went on to say, how could I dare pursue a doctorate degree when one of the people I admire most never attained it, but only attained the level of master, and I wouldn't presume to be greater than he, that is St. Thomas Aquinas.
I mean, he had a doctorate in theology.
He had a master's. That being said, his master's was incredibly more difficult than what we go through now.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So there's that. But in any case, doctorates are good. Today we're going to talk about, since it is the 17th anniversary of 9/11 and those horrendous terrorist attacks on our nation, we're going to talk about that today in conjunction with our ongoing discussion on relativism, which I would actually like to explore a point that I've been going through in class, because we have the same ethics class. on relativism and tolerance.
Different sections still.
Yeah, I know. I'm mad. This is our third class together, but not actually together.
Third class together? What was the other one?
I think so. I don't remember. We've taken a couple classes, but ended up in different sections.
Oh, that's all right.
I think Holy Apostles is trying to keep us out of the same class together because of...
We take over.
They probably want to preserve the sanity of their professors.
Honestly, I would give you as many sophistical replies to your post as I possibly could. I would twist your words like I was playing the game Twister.
This is probably God's way of making sure that you actually pass the class.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I felt a little bit nervous about this last week because I argued for relativism, simply as an exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, go on.
I want to talk about relativism and tolerance because there's an interesting question on the relationship between that.
Sure.
We talk about that, and we're going to talk about 9/11 and Islam and whether or not Christians and Islam worship the same God and such. So that's on the docket for today.
Yay, no small topics on the Lost Voice. Of course, everything that we do is important and it matters, and you matter. And what's important for you, Jake, is that you're beautiful, people like you, and gosh darn it, you're just smart.
Thank you.
I don't know, it's some 1980s. I think I said it wrong. It was like a 1980s affirmation for self-esteem.
Okay.
That people were kind of like up in arms about. I don't know.
I'm going to try and call back in Mr. Snooty because there is an echo on my phone.
Echo. Is it because you think that I echo you so well as my teacher?
Well, I don't think...
You never really formally taught me, though, which I'm upset by.
No, I just taught you by example in Socratic dialogue.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, leave.
Okay, I'm going to call back in.
Bye-bye. All right, while Jake's gone, let me look up St. Thomas's education. Let's see here. Completed his studies, went to Naples. Let's see here. He was a doctor of the church.
I have returned.
Hey, Jake, how's it going? I'm not doing anything to undermine you whatsoever.
That's fine.
Anyway, you're talking about your class and tolerance and relativism.
I was explaining what we're going to talk about today. And there's still an echo on my phone, so the audience is going to have to deal with it.
I don't know, it feels awkward, doesn't it?
It does. It actually confuses me sometimes.
Is it me talking, or is it just me hearing my own voice in my head again? Or is it another voice that's speaking to you, Jake?
Something
is it the
like
lost
that.
voice?
You know what, it might be.
Poor Jake. Poor listeners.
So where do you want to start, Mr. Studi?
I don't know. Where do you want to start? I think we should start, since we were talking about relativism last week, it'd be good for us to talk about it now.
Okay.
And I want to note that relativism, people often think that it is a complete denial of any moral good or any moral truth whatsoever or any moral system, but rather it's not quite that. There's still an element of moral realism, and somebody who would completely reject ethics would be an amoral realist or moral arealist. They reject those things. But relativism is something that is a school of thought which says that morality and right or wrong is determined by certain factors like sociobiological evolution or the context in which one lives in their community or the individual person's conscience, rather than having some sort of externally imposed and universal or absolute ethical system or moral standard. So I just want to make that note. A lot of times people think that relativism is just completely throwing all conceptions of morality out the window.
Right.
Anyway, so you want to talk about your post on?
Oh, there's a question on there on the relationship between relativism and tolerance. And in the textbook that we're using, the philosopher-author argues that there is no relationship whatsoever, that relativism has no bearing on tolerance. And I would disagree with a few caveats, because I think it's not a wholesale disagreement. But my ultimate premise with this, and your commentary would be good, especially because I've already posted for the week, and that's all done. So I'm not cheating or plagiarizing. Now we can have this freewheeling discussion. But if a society is relativistic in its moral code, there would necessarily have to be tolerance. That being said, if a relativist demands tolerance, then they themselves are no longer a relativist but an absolutist, because they're demanding something of another. Mm-hmm. So it's not the individuals or even the society at large that demands tolerance, but if tolerance is not a value that naturally flows out of relativism, then your culture is going to end up in chaos or anarchy, because one relativist that is intolerant of the fact that another has a separate set of moral values will end up being an absolutist in a relativist society, and that's going to cause societal upheaval.
Yes, and this is exactly what Friedrich Nietzsche had said in a number of his works. Now that we've, I'm just going to summarize here. Now that we've established that God doesn't exist, let's just face the facts. That God doesn't exist. There is no right or wrong. It's given to us by some sort of supreme authority. All that we have left is human reason. And then he goes through and systematically dismantles Kant and John Stuart Mill and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and other romanticists. And he says none of these things work out for us. Because ultimately it comes down to whose will is being most forcefully imposed. And when it comes to the interaction between societies and groups, we, according to Nietzsche, see that what we have is not a rule of the strong, but rather it's often a rule of the weak in force, in mass. And so you have, he gives this analogy of sheep who are afraid of the raptors that fly above, who will swoop down and devour them if they're able to do so. And what the sheep do is they actually band together to create a moral system. And this moral system, they are able to convince the raptors, who are strong and powerful by nature, that to kill is something that's going to destroy them in the future. If they killed a sheep now, then in the future they're going to have some sort of eternal torment or some such thing, or if the gods had deemed that to be so, and that to be like a sheep rather than a raptor was what the true will of the gods is, and that's what the true good is. But Nietzsche says that's crap. That's stupid. I mean, if you just look at the nature of things, and the nature of thing is that the strong animals are the ones who are going to be able to force their opinions and force their way of being on others. And so he says, in the same way, humans, we have banded together and try to find ways to suppress the strong in service of the weak, but that holds back our society from advancing to the Ubermensch, to the Superman. And so if we're going to have some sort of progress to enjoy our lives better, to have a new kind of human being, then what we need to do is reject all moral codes which seem to favor the weak and the weak and the disenfranchised, but rather let the strong rule. And when when we come to the question of tolerance nowadays, what we'll see is, like you said, it's people who are professing tolerance, but the tolerance that they profess is intolerant in its flavor, because they demand tolerance from others. And the way that it's been acted out in the recent in recent history has been a forcing of certain opinions to the point of social isolation, being politically discredited, having a hard time getting a job. Things like not using the word man to refer to all humankind could land you in trouble in a certain class.
Sounds like you have a story to tell about that student.
A story or whatever. I don't know. There was a couple of students of mine who got all up who had a big fuss about, why the heck are you using man to refer to all humans? I'm just like, come on, it's standard English. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's not a hill I'm going to die on, so I'll try to acquiesce to the request. But they were just making a huge deal of it. Just, come on, driving me nuts. But anyway, so Nietzsche was basically saying that we need to assert our will, and that if you want society to progress, then it's the strong who must dominate the weak, and the weak are only fit for either extermination or servitude.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're seeing some of the Nietzschean character of relativism. The Nietzschean character of relativism come out in our day.
Yeah, and I think tolerance. There's a distinction that one of my classmates made, and it's one that Archbishop Fulton Sheen made too. That tolerance. There's a distinction between tolerance of the person and tolerance of the act. And I'm not sure where our textbook author would lead on this because he doesn't make these distinctions. So I think I don't know how a relativist would sit either with this. You always tolerate the person because the value of an individual's in their personhood, not in the action that they do. But then when the relativists tolerate the action, even if it goes against the agreed upon moral norms of a society. Right. Because as you said, relativism is not a wholesale do whatever the heck you want, even though that is how relativism really is today.
Yeah, and I think that some of the point you're making there is that we've misunderstood the term tolerance and taken it to mean acceptance of whatever, anything that's not intolerant or bigoted or set in its ways. I think would be another way of describing it. I mean, if Christianity is intolerant to some extent, or Orthodox Christianity, because we have hard set doctrines and we're not going to change them. And so it's intolerant in that way, according to the new usage, the new speak. If you want to pull up, is that 1988 or is that Brave New World? I can't remember. The two novels are so similar. I think it's 1988. But I think that the proper use of tolerance, which is neither a virtue nor a vice, but is a tool that can either be virtuous or vicious depending on how it's applied, is really well described by Peter Kreeft, who says that tolerance is putting up for the sake of a good thing with an inconvenience or something that is not favorable or even bad for a greater good. Mm-hmm. And the example he gives is that you don't tolerate, and it's absolutely absurd to tolerate a good thing. You don't tolerate sunshine and beautiful weather. You tolerate the rain for the sake of the trees growing and the natural cycle to take its course, so that way the whole ecosystem works splendidly. And so when we say that we need to tolerate certain things like gay marriage or transgender ideology or a different religion, almost what we're saying, if we take the proper and classic definition of tolerance, is saying that these are a bad thing. This is a bad thing that we need to tolerate for the sake of another end. But now tolerance is more of an acceptance, an issue of acceptance rather than of the bad thing or what we would normally perceive to be bad, because there is no bad here. It's simply other, which I think is what leads into the notion of tolerance as a way of understanding as acceptance rather than putting up with something. So it's a part of Christian character to tolerate some really stupid things. I tolerate my kids' behavior for the sake of making sure that they can grow in virtue. I tolerate I can say you tolerate my ADHD symptoms for the sake of the greater sake of our conversation and friendship, and it's something that you've been learning to do fairly well. Actually, not a lot of people are really capable of learning to tolerate ADHD symptoms when they work closely with somebody with ADHD. But in any case, I think that there's a problem with terms and definitions when we talk about tolerance, and it's the tolerance of forced tolerance that I tend to take up the most serious issues, because I've been a victim of it too, both in terms of somebody who's been a victim per perpetrator and a victim per victim per se. And what I mean by that is, when I was younger, I had a teacher who was all about tolerance, and nearly every week somebody would say something like, there's this expression, I think it's a stupid expression, but to say like something's dumb or stupid or faux pas, whatever, they'd be like, oh my gosh, that's gay, which is, I think, sick. I think that's a very, very poor expression, and it's very uncharitable. But she would break down in tears, and I admire her compassion, and then lecture us for the rest of the hour on tolerance, and accepting people for who they really are. Number one, I think it's deplorable to say that a person's sexual identity is the core of their being, and number two, all she did was provide us with an opportunity to skip class, more or less, because most of us just checked out. Or things like using politically correct language. She would correct us all the time if ever called somebody black, and she would just jump down our throats on those things.
This wasn't the same teacher that told you to give up because you'll never make anything of yourself?
No. That was somebody else. Oh man, I got to give him a call. I found out where he works, so I'm gonna call him up and be like, 2 master's degrees. Radio show I teach. Yeah.
You don't have 2 masters yet.
Almost 2 master's degrees. I'm thinking I'll probably do it this semester of my thesis. So next semester, give them a call then. Yeah. Like, I'm working on a thesis. This is what it's on. And I just wanted to remind you of something you said to me that's stuck with me for my whole life, at least since your class anyway.
I'm going to laugh when his response is, see, I inspired you. This is because of me.
He would. I actually really liked him as a teacher. Besides, he was funny. He and I got along really well. He actually might say something along those lines if he feels comfortable doing so. He probably won't be, because he'll at first think, oh no, this person's been offended here and whatnot. And I'll probably even mention something about it, how it used to be a negative influence in my life, and now it's the exact opposite in a way. I'm trying to prove him wrong. But and let him know that I really appreciated him as a teacher. Besides, anyway, so when that was the case, or sorry, when I was in eighth, this was one of my 8th grade teachers, my English teacher actually, who was foisting all this tolerance and relativism on me as an 8th grade kid who doesn't know much more than sort of the Bible stories I heard in Sunday school. I mean, granted, I knew the Bible fairly well for a middle schooler, but I didn't have a philosophical framework to put it in, and so my teacher was giving me a philosophical framework, and I actually took that to my home. And I remember when I think it was in January of 2001, DC Talk was on their farewell tour, and Michael Tate, who was one of the members of DC Talk, was talking about how one of the other members was talking about Michael Tate. Michael Tate is black, note, and the other member was saying he might be the only black person, but he's got the whitest soul here. And so the way that it sounded to me, and I would never, advocate or advise anybody to use that kind of language. It's just stupid. Given how people are going to interpret that. I was taking that as, oh, this DC Talk guy, I don't remember if it was Toby Mac or Kevin, shoot, what's his last name? That's fine. Is he saying that, like, black souls are evil? Is he saying that white souls are bad, are good? And by white, I meant, like, I was thinking, like, race. And a part of me knew that he was really talking about the character and content and using white and black for purity and for, impurity.
Right.
But either way, I made a big fuss about it with my parents, and they got really mad, and I actually had to leave the concert because of those issues. I came back eventually when I calmed down. I mean, I was an emotional teenager too, but I've been there.
That's why you should have stuck to Stained and Seven Dust like I did as a teenager.
Stick to what?
Listen to heavy metal.
Seven Ducks. Oh.
Seven Dust.
I can't say it.
We lived very different childhoods.
We did. We really, really did. Which is great. Very great. And so now, one of the things that I found to be interesting, and you'd probably see this if you looked at the history of secularism in the United States here, is that up until a certain point in our history, sometime in 2001, there wasn't a whole lot of vitriol regarding atheism, or regarding religion. Sure, there were some things here and there, but it wasn't as widespread now that we have Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens, who has passed away in the last few years, writing in the popular...
discovered a few things about religion.
What?
I bet he just discovered a few things about religion.
He sure did. I just want to note, C.S. Lewis stumbled upon a gravestone once, and the epitaph was, "Here lies an atheist, all dressed up and nowhere to go." And Lewis, understanding that obviously he was trying to be humorous, remarked by saying, "Man, I hope he certainly hopes that we're the case right now." I bet you that, or something like that. That was horrible. That was a terrible way to phrase that. He certainly hopes that we're the case. But anyway, aside from my horrible summary or paraphrase of Lewis's quote. Anyway, so relativism has been kind of in the forefront of our mind in the West for quite a while. A slow rejection of ethical norms, and up until recently, the only foothold that objective morality has had on the American consciousness has been in religion. But when it came to the terror attacks of 9/11, there was at first a strong reaction against radical Islam and condemning this act as absolutely wicked and a real act of terrorism that nobody in their right mind could ever defend as something that's good, to having a large movement within the West against religion in general, and in particular Christianity and Islam, led by people like Dawkins and Hitchens and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and others. And a part of that movement has also fostered a rejection, not wholesale of God in itself, but a rejection of formal religion. And with formal religion being out of the focus of what focus or the source of people's ethical norms, relativism, I think, has had an opportunity to creep in a way that it wasn't able to do so before without the vanguard of religious faith.
Well, not only that, but with the advent of social media shortly after 9/11 and the cult of self, relativism really elevates the self as the moral arbiter, or the personal arbiter of morality that it was kind of a perfect storm for relativism to come about.
Yeah, so there was a lot of obviously there's a lot of influences. You can't, whenever there's a sociological change, you can't just pinpoint one thing. But you can. What's that?
It's your fault, Studi.
Yeah.
I don't know. You said I can't.
Actually, you know that song, "We Didn't Start the Fire"?
Yeah, Billy Joel.
Yeah, Billy Joel, that's who it is. Long story short, we had to watch that. I don't remember why, but we had to watch that in we had to watch that in civics, and all my classmates took that song and then kept on singing, "Studi started the fire."
It seems all right.
Since the world's been turning, and it turns out, yeah, they're right.
Yeah. Good for them. They recognized it early.
So I just want to have a little update here.
Yes.
About something we had talked about a little bit earlier.
Oh boy, what?
The master's degree in the Middle Ages was the equivalent of our doctorate degree.
Right.
However, their master's degree was much more involved than our doctorate degree, which is incredible because doctorate degrees are intense. And interestingly enough, let's see here. You only got the title magister or doctor in Sacra Pagina, and so that means you had to comment. You had to do commentaries, usually on scriptures, on determined disputations, and they have to preach sermons as well, which is interesting.
Right. Yes, I actually have on my computer St. Thomas Aquinas's final. What would it be? Basically, his master's address at the reception of his degree.
Really? Can you send that to me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd be extremely interested in reading that. I'll text you.
Somewhere on my computer.
What's
somewhere
it called?
In the depths of my archives. I don't remember. I'd have to go look at it.
Huh. That's really cool. Anyway, so.
Thank you,
all right, we're both
IPT.
right. Yeah, that's legit.
We're not both right. How are we both right?
Well, because the technical term is master's degree.
Right.
But it's the equivalent of a doctoral degree.
Yeah, they didn't have doctorates back then. That was the highest degree they had, and it was, as I said, way more intense than what our master's is.
Well, right, and then even more intense than our doctorate degree. And so functionally it's a doctorate, but nominally it's a master's degree.
Yeah.
Because for us, because both master and doctor do speak of teaching, right? Anyway, I'm done. This isn't worth our time. Jake, it's all relative anyway. What matters is that you and I
tolerate
believe,
that statement.
I tolerate your statement as well, and what matters is that you and I believe in the same St. Thomas Aquinas, even if we have different conceptions about what his educational achievements actually consisted in. Just like how, you see in the transition here, Jake?
Yeah, it says
you like the bridge right here. Just like how as Christians we can affirm along with the Muslims that we worship the same God of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
Transition. What do you think about that, Jake? Do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? Let's talk about that one. What?
Vatican II says so. So it's something we ought to keep in mind, that the Church has spoken that they do in fact worship the same God.
Mm-hmm.
But the conception of that God and his, let's call, attributes are radically different, to the point where that God is almost completely unrecognizable in the two religions.
Mm-hmm.
So nominally, yes, we worship the same God, or they worship the God of Abraham through the line of Ishmael. We worship the God of Abraham through the line of Isaac. And so already we could see where Ishmael and Isaac, who were diametrically opposed to one another, likely had a different understanding of God. That being said, however, the conception of Islam did not come about through a continual line dating back to Ishmael.
Right.
Muhammad sought to unite the Arab people against the Christian West, and he understood quite brilliantly the best way to do so was through politics and religion, and so he made a religion that was also political.
Sure.
And and you could speak to this, that the Arab people always claimed descendancy from Ishmael, because Ishmael went and founded the land of Edom, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they may have some physical lineage, but not a lineage of worship.
Right, and there's a distinction in their conception of God as well that actually follows from the story of Abraham. If you look at the story of Abraham, you see that, of course, we all remember that God promised Abraham to have a son. His descendants would be as numerous as the stars. Which, incidentally, so when people think about that passage in Genesis 15, they usually or 12, they usually think that 15. They usually think that Abraham is like looking at this beautiful starry sky above, and you can see the Milky Way cluster and the arm of our galaxy and all the stars that are within the visual range of Earth. Which at the time they had numbered to like I think 1,100 individual stars were visible to the naked eye, that were cataloged anyway. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is a little bit later on in that story, it talks about how as the sun was setting down, God put Abraham into a deep sleep. So what does that mean? It means it was in the middle of the day that God brought Abraham out and said, count the stars in the sky if you can. And so, we would classify this as a star, and so in a way we can say it was literal insofar as Abram only had one true son, which was heir to the promise. But the greater point was that God was saying, just as you know that the nighttime will yield stars in the sky, even though in the daytime you can't see them, so too will I fulfill the promise that I made to you, even if you don't see it here and now. Mm-hmm. But regardless, as Abraham and Sarah got older, they tried to take matters in their own hands, and they had Abraham sleep with Ishmael's mother, sleep with Hagar, who gave birth to Ishmael. And Ishmael eventually was rejected and sent into a desert. Now God took care of Ishmael and his mother by sending an angel to give them water and food, and brought them to a well and whatnot. And then, of course, like you said, they became the people of Edom. But Isaac, on the other hand, was accepted by Abraham as a loving father, and even though eventually Isaac was offered up to be a sacrifice, which there are a lot of people who argue that Isaac willingly laid down his life. The view of God.
Well, because Isaac was like 20-something years old when he was going to be sacrificed. It's not like he didn't know what was going on.
Right. And again, remember, if Abraham was 100 years old when Ishmael was born, and it was 13 years after that until Isaac was born, and then again another 20 years here, how old was Abraham? 130 something? Holy cow! That's an old guy. And if even like a 12-year-old could probably take down a 130-year-old man, honestly.
Right.
So. That's beside the point here. What happened from the conception of God in Isaac and the conception of God in Ishmael was that I'll start with Isaac. Isaac saw Abraham as a loving father, somebody who was going to fulfill his promises, who was there to protect him, who taught him how to worship and everything. And that same conception, that same encounter or experience of Abraham, his earthly father, continued into the Jewish and then Christian heritage of seeing God as something of a heavenly father, someone who cares about his creation and loves him. But Ishmael, who was the son of both Abraham and the slave girl Hagar, began to see God as a dictator, a master, to the point where some Muslim theologians, they really call them scholars, view the relationship between man and God in the same way that man has a relationship with dogs. They're nice, they're great to have around. Ultimately, they're a pet, and if I have to put it down, I will. I love them. I love them deeply, but ultimately, they're just a dog. Whereas God tends to see us more like sons, although we can't say that in the formal way that we're sons of God until we receive baptism through the grace of Jesus Christ. And so there's actually a lineage and a history theologically with the Arab people to see God as something more of a dictator rather than as a loving father because of the split that happened between Ishmael and Isaac in the way that Abram treated him.
Which plays into then how Muslims view the world. I mean, however we view God is going to dictate how we view the world. And so if man is no more than God's slave boys or dogs, as you say, that's going to begin with the idea of the people who practice that religion. I was just pulling up here. Incredibly amazing, and yet, for some stupid reason, controversial speech at Regensburg by Benedict XVI. In it, what he's driving at is that violence and religion actually don't have a relationship, and a religion that supports violence in order to spread itself is not a religion at all.
Right.
And he quotes I believe, a 14th century emperor, Byzantine emperor, when he writes this. Let me find it again. I'm on my phone and trying to... Here he says, "Show me just what Muhammad brought that was new, and there you'll find things only evil and inhuman, such as the command to spread by the sword and the faith he preached." Benedict goes on to elaborate. The emperor, after having expressed himself so forcefully, goes on to explain in detail the reasons why spreading the faith through violence is something unreasonable. Violence is incompatible with the nature of God and the nature of the soul. God, he says, is not pleased by blood, and not acting reasonably is contrary to God's nature. Faith is born of the soul, not the body. Whoever would lead someone to faith needs the ability to speak well and to reason properly, without violence and threats. To convince a reasonable soul, one does not need a strong arm or weapons of any kind, or any other means of threatening a person with death. The decisive statement in this argument against violent conversion is this: not to act in accordance with reason is contrary to God's nature. The editor, Theodore Corey, observes, "For the emperor, as a Byzantine shaped by Greek philosophy, the statement is self-evident. But for Muslim teaching, God is absolutely transcendent. His will is not bound up with any of our categories, even that of rationality." Here Corey quotes a work of the noted French Islamist Arnaldez, who points out that Ibn Hazm went so far as to state that God is not bound even by his own word, and that nothing would oblige him to reveal the truth to us. Were it God's will, we would even have to practice idolatry. So
yes.
Yes, Benedict is driving at the heart that Islam actually cast reason out of its religion back with, was it Avicenna or Averroes? Yep. I was getting too confused.
Avicenna and Averroes are two names for the same person.
Oh, okay. That's why I always got them confused.
Yeah.
But Averroes, I like using that one better, was a Muslim philosopher, and on the principle of sound reason found some issues within Islam that he brought up. And I don't remember if Averroes was killed or exiled.
Oh, no, it was Averroes, but it was Ibn Sina and Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina, who were the two people, were the same one. Averroes is the guy you're talking about. Sorry, go on.
Okay, yeah. So the ultimate response from the leader of Islam is that they are to no longer do philosophy. And the shedding of reason really began at that point. And as Pope Benedict points out in Regensburg, to act against reason is really to act against God. Because as Christians, we believe that we are reasonable because God is reasonable. Mm-hmm. That our reason flows out of God's reason already being present. Whereas with Islam, they're applying their reason to God to say that, God is above us, therefore he doesn't have to act within our structure of reason, so he can do whatever he wants. Right. And it's looking at it in the reverse way, which is a gross, terrible philosophy. But you can't fault them since they got rid of philosophy like 700 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and they have a dual.
1,000 years ago.
So yeah, they have a dual theory of truth as well. Insofar as one of the issues of Averroes is that he was coming up with doctrines from his study of Aristotle, like the eternality of the universe, and the non-subsistence of the human soul after death. And what the problem was there is that those things are obviously contrary to Islam, and so he was actually put on a trial for heresy, and someone and the way he defended himself, which is just it's unbelievable, worked, was proposing this two-view theory of truth, and that there can be religious truths and then there are truths of reason and science, which don't necessarily need to contradict each other, but they can both be true. And then the Muslim judges said, all right, we're fine with that, as long as you're not denying that the Quran is true. And that was basically what was adopted after that, as kind of the official Muslim viewpoint, which, as you can imagine, is very difficult to actually hold.
Right. All this really, leads up to the aversion that Islam has to the West, in that the West is really built on the wisdom of the Greeks. And then Christianity, which is a further blossoming of that. And we don't really have time to go into the whole history of how Islam hates America, but one of the first attacks of Islam on American interests was back in 1785, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. And it was Islamists had attacked a U.S. merchant ship near Tripoli. And it was Thomas Jefferson, who was our Secretary of State at the time, traveled there to figure out what happened, because it was a completely peaceful ship. We weren't in any time of war. And he, in order to figure it all out, he had purchased a Quran while out east and learned Arabic in order to read it, because the Quran is not translated, period. And what he found was this book, which was incredibly important, and he brought it back to America, and he was the first one to print the Quran in the West, but he printed it with a warning label on the front, and it said something to the effect of, everybody in the West ought to read this in order to understand the insanity of our enemies.
Yeah.
Because it called for so much hate and violence towards the unbeliever, and that did not really jive with Jefferson. Now, to be totally fair, Jefferson despised the Bible too and rewrote the Bible in a lot of places. So he wasn't really a fan of religion to begin with.
Yeah, tore out all the places with miracles for the usual Enlightenment deism, the Spartan man's Christianity. And this element of violence was a mark that even St. Thomas commented on in Summa Contra Gentiles when he's talking about how God reveals himself to man, but he doesn't expect man to simply adhere to it without proper signs. And but rather he offers motives of credibility, and one of those is miracles. And when he's talking about this, he's talking about the saints, the miracles that have led up to this day, and on the virtuous character of the New Testament heroes and the apostles and Christ himself. He goes on to say, speaking of another revealed religion, Islam, he said, on the other hand, those who founded sects committed to erroneous doctrines proceed in a way that is opposite to this. The point is clear in the case of Muhammad. He seduced the people by promises of carnal pleasure, to which the concupiscence of the flesh goads us. His teaching also contained precepts in conformity with his promise. He gave free rein to carnal pleasure. The Muslim conception of heaven actually involves like lots of sex with
very carnal
angels and even young men, and lots of alcohol, which alcohol is great too. But from I remember,
because Islam is a religion of teetotalism.
Well, I know. No, it is alcohol. You can't have alcohol on earth, but you get rewarded with it in heaven.
It's odd.
I know, right? And for men, it's like you have these vast halls of women waiting just to jump your bones, and it's great. But for women, as was described to me by a very good friend of mine who's a very involved Muslim, she said it's like a really nice little life in the suburbs. You got the white picket fence, a great kitchen, etc., etc. I'm like, oh my gosh, this wasn't invented by man. But anyway, yeah. And so in all of this, St. Thomas continues, as is not expected, he was obeyed by carnal men. As for proof of the truths of his doctrine, he brought forth only such as could be grasped with the natural ability of anyone with very modest wisdom. Indeed, the truths that he taught were mingled with many fables and doctrines of great falsity. He did not bring forth any signs produced in a supernatural way, etc., etc. On the contrary, Muhammad said that he was sent in the power of his arms, which are signs not lacking even to robbers and tyrants. And he goes on to say a little later, those who believed in him were desert wanderers, utterly ignorant of divine teaching, which was true. That's how you get the Muslim teaching that Christians believe that the Trinity is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, Father, Son, and Mary, not the Holy Spirit. And what they say is that Christians are lying about the Trinitarian doctrine when they say that the Holy Spirit is the third person of the Trinity rather than Mary. And it's through these ignorant people and their numbers that Muhammad forced others to become followers by violence of his arms. And there's a number of other things that he says, but all of this is exactly how Muhammad spread his teachings, was largely through the sword. And especially in the later period, once he started gaining a little bit of money and gaining some weapons and gaining followers, when he had power, he forced that power on others. And you see this, and if you look at a chronological, if you have a chronological guide to the different surahs in the Quran, the earlier Muhammad is more, let's tolerate each other, the people of the book, we're all worshiping the same God, etc., etc. And then later on, he starts talking about in those days, the end times, even the rocks will shout out, "Oh Muslim, come look behind me, for there is a Jew. Come here so that you may slay him," and all sorts of other things about do not tolerate those who profess that God has a partner. To have sex with somebody to produce Jesus as a son. I mean, he couldn't raise his mind above carnal things to recognize that the procession of the Divine Trinity is something that's only analogical.
Well, also, if your aim is to gain followers, that's an easy doctrine to follow. Just living the carnal life is in part being faithful to the Holy Book. That's an easy path to follow. One of fasting and sacrifice is not so easy. Now, to credit the faithful Muslims, when they celebrate Ramadan and their month-long fast, and some of their 5 times of prayer in a day, Catholics have a lot they can learn from the devout practice that Muslims have. But that's not to, at the same time, endorse the lack of reason that is found within their religion. Which we'll have to get into next week because it is time to go. A special word of commemoration and remembrance for all those who died on 9/11 17 years ago, and the first responders and everybody who acted so heroically this time 17 years ago. And God bless them and keep them and bless their families as well. For the Lost Voice radio program, this is Jacob Nelson along with Jonathan Studi. Feel free to email us at lostvoice@wcatradio.com, and we will see you again next week. God bless.
All right, God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.